Today's episode deals with depression and suicide. Our discussion includes details that you may find triggering or disturbing. If you presently find yourself in a particularly vulnerable place, you may want to pause this episode, put it down, and come back later. Hey, this is Dominic, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominic and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Brian. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
I'm kind of blown away by this episode, guys. It's one of me and Brian's favorite that we've ever recorded, and we're about to head into some dark territory. Depression and suicide are some of the heaviest topics known to man, and yet, ironically, I suspect that you will find this to be one of the most enjoyable, humorous, and informative interviews that we've ever done, and that's all thanks to the magic of our special guest, who's a comedian. And I'll introduce him in a few moments. But first, let me hit you with a few sobering statistics. The National Institute of Mental Health reported that in 2018, 48,000 Americans lost their lives to suicide. That's twice as many Americans than lost their lives to homicide. So 2 times as many people took their lives at their own hands than the hands of another. And that number is expected to double in the year of 2020 when we take into consideration the pandemic era. Every 9 minutes, a person takes their life, which means by the end of this episode, 5 or 6 more people will no longer be with us at their own hand. Now, chances are very good that you know someone who's either taken their life or have someone close to you who's considered it. Chances are probably 100% that you know someone who deals with some form of depression, whether they've revealed it to you or not. Having open, candid dialogues about these darker subjects is essential to create safe environments for those who feel like their depressive or suicidal thoughts are unsafe to express, for fear of judgment, not being understood, or triggering someone else's discomfort. One of our principles of being a great man is to create environments where we and those we care about can thrive. That includes creating safe spaces for the people in our lives who struggle with depression and suicide to be able to open up to us, feel seen, heard, safe, and supported. So, in order to help us do that, our special guest today, Frank King, does an incredible service in equipping us with practical guidance on how to do all of that, all while having a number of laughs along the way. So who is Frank King? Frank is a mental health comedian. There aren't too many of those that special in depression and suicide, so he's truly living in rarefied air. He's performed with the likes of the top, like Jim Carrey, Dennis Miller, Ellen DeGeneres, Rosie O'Donnell, Adam Sandler, and many more. He's also a 6-time TEDx talker because he has a knack for creating catchy headlines that conference organizers want. And he's turned into a coach for how you can land your TEDx talk. And I've linked his information in the show notes. He's a corporate keynote speaker, and he himself has major depressive disorder and chronic suicidal ideation. And he has come so close to taking his own life that he says in his own words, "I know what the barrel of my gun tastes like." And that's the kind of conversation, the frankness, pardon my pun, the directness, the candor that we're going to get into over the course of the conversation today. So in this episode, you're going to learn what not to say to a person who has revealed their depression to you, what to say to a person who has revealed their depression to you, what to say to a person who has revealed to you that they're potentially suicidal and that they're potentially considering taking their own lives. We talk about 3 staggering statistics on how many people contemplate, attempt, and succeed in suicide, how the pandemic has caused this situational depression phenomena, and it's exploded onto the scene that has caused many people mental health issues and an explosion in suicide attempts and successes. And then Frank goes through his 5-step self-care process that helps him fortify his inner foundation on a daily basis that keeps him on the path. Now, I've linked a number of resources in the show notes that you'll be able to refer to along the way because Frank has a dozen of them. And one thing to know up front, Frank would want you to know this. Because he's a comedian and he wants you to laugh, you have permission to laugh at some of these darker issues because he brings them up in a way that feels cathartic for him, that feels safe for him, and allows us to venture to some of these darker places by taking some of the edge off. You'll see there's a few moments in here where we have some good laughs at the places that you would least expect it. So enjoy our conversation today, diving into the deeper realms, the darker realms of depression and suicide with comedian Frank King. You know, Bri, you're usually the one who's known for providing the comedic relief on this show, right? To break up my ultra seriousness sometimes. But we actually have, for our very first time in 200 plus episodes, a bona fide comedian on the show. So is your identity feeling threatened in this particular moment?
I feel relaxed. I feel like I already, before we hit record, I already bombed a couple jokes with Frank. So like we've already crossed that bridge. I'm feeling good about getting this thing started.
Good. Frank King, welcome to the show, man.
I'm delighted to be here, gentlemen.
You know, I knew that we would get along when I watched your TEDx talk, one of the 6 that you've done. And you said that you are a copious coffee consumer because you believe that coffee is the mother's milk of motivation.
I wrote that.
You did. That is genius. I need a coffee mug with that on it. Do you sell one of those perchance?
I do not, but I will be. Thanks for the idea. You know, sometimes when you have something like that, you don't really see the potential in the idea, but other people go, hey, you know what? You should have a coffee mug with that on there.
At the very minimum, a bumper sticker or something. So just put that there. I'm buying it. Frank, for our audience who has not had a chance to meet you, please introduce yourself. Let them know who you are.
I am the mental health comedian, which seems like an odd juxtaposition. I speak on suicide prevention generally as a workplace health and safety issue. People ask me, how did you pick the topic of suicide? Well, you know what? The topic picked me. My family has something called generational depression and suicide. My grandmother died by suicide. My mother found her. My great aunt died by suicide. My mother and I found her. I was 4 years old. I screamed for days. And if you want to know the story, I'll spare your listeners. It's horror movie awful. Yeah, my first TEDx was a matter of laugh, L-A-U-G-H, or death, a matter of laugh or death. That's when in 2014, I came out for the first time ever as depressed and suicidal. Nobody knew. My family, my friends, my wife, nobody had any idea because people with mental illness are often very good actors. I have a SAG card, Screen Actors Guild card, for a reason. I am a good actor. So, and what I was trying to do there, guys, because the mental health and the comedian, I've been a comedian since the day after Christmas, full-time, day after Christmas, 1985. So everybody in the meeting planning world, speaker bureau world, thought of me as a funny guy. And I wanted to go from being a funny speaker to a speaker who was funny. And my wife suggested a TEDx talk. And I said, what's that? And just by chance, I got an invitation that week to apply to one in Vancouver, BC. And I got it. And then I got phone calls from 2 more events saying, do you have any more mental health TEDx talks in you? So it allowed me to rebrand from funny speaker to speaker who's funny. It's in my DNA. And when I coach speakers or TEDx speakers, that's always the best situation where whatever it is they're going to speak about is part of them. It's organic. It's, you can wake them out of a sound sleep and they can give you 45 minutes on it without breathing hard. I mean, I made a good living as a comic in clubs. I did 2,629 nights in a row in the clubs. My lovely wife came with me, just came along for the ride. That's 7 years and change. And you guys mentioned Jim Carrey. When I was a baby comedian back in the day, working at the Comedy Store, he was a headliner already at the Comedy Store, and he was just doing impressions. I mean, he was an amazing impressionist. It was scary how good he was. I began my career at the Comedy Store in San Diego. It was a branch of the one on Sunset in Hollywood. And then on the road, I worked with Dennis Miller and Foxworthy and Ron White, Bill Engvall and Ellen and Rosie and Dana Carvey and Kevin Nealon and Adam Sandler and Kevin James, back when they were just comics.
Who did you love the most? Of all of those, who was your favorite?
Well, the biggest dick was Dennis Miller.
That's not surprising.
He had foreskin marks right here. And the nicest one, Paula Poundstone was really sweet.
Huh.
Yeah, she was a doll. And Ellen was, I opened for her. We didn't have a lot of interaction. But on the road, you're not only working together, but back then they had the comedy condo, 3-bedroom condo instead of a hotel that they would turn every week and clean. And so I didn't just work with Ron White. We spent a week together living in a condo. And by the way, he's funnier in real life than he is on stage. Amazing stories. All right, I'm in Amarillo, Texas, with a midget and a hooker. Okay, I don't care if my bladder explodes. I'm not going anywhere until I find out how this story comes out. Anything involves a midget and a hooker. Then I did radio for a year and a half, and I took a #1 morning show in Raleigh, North Carolina, my old hometown, from #1 to #6 in 18 months. Yeah, a friend of mine said, you didn't just drive it into the ground. You drove that sucker into Middle Earth. I did. And the comedy club circuit was disappearing, so I made the jump to the corporate comedy circuit because my act is very clean.
Is it really? Like, it sounds like you really don't want to be all that clean. Did you clean it up for the corporate circuit?
Yeah, we've already had a foreskin midget and hooker comment here. I don't know if it's that clean.
Well, here's a dirty little secret about clean comedy is
it pays.
It pays a ton, by a factor of 10 or 20 better for the same amount of time. And I actually had a dirty period for several weeks in my act. I'm in Vegas at the Improv at the Riviera Hotel, the old Riv, and some comic, 90 years old, wearing a tuxedo, Vegas comic, comes up to me after my show. He goes, "Kid, you're funny, but you got to drop the dirty material. You don't have the face for it." And he was absolutely right. I'm a nice guy. When I worked the cruise ships, I always worked the longer runs with the older people because I'm like their grandson. And I did the rubber chicken circuit till 2008 when the recession was raging. Business dropped off 80% overnight. We lost everything in a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. And that's when I learned what the barrel of my gun tasted like, which is what led me, I almost ended my life. And then that is the moment at which I realized what I should be doing with my life, speaking on suicide prevention. And so I use my lived experience, my family, my lived experience, and then the humor. When I talk to the audience, I go, I can tell you what the barrel of my gun tastes like. Spoiler alert, I did not pull the trigger. It gets a nervous laugh.
Can you talk about that moment really quick? Because it sounds like that was a pivotal moment of you were doing stuff, you were doing comedy, you were doing radio, but you just said after that moment, you realized what you wanted to do with your life. Prior to that moment, what did you think you were doing with your life?
Well, I was speaking. I had a motivational speech, had a networking speech. I've had 2 aortic valve replacements, a double bypass, a heart attack, and 3 stents. So I had a cardiac comedy speech. But there's a expression in the speaking business, pick a lane. Don't be a generalist, be an expert or thought leader, whatever. And I realized, you know what? And the problem with that is opportunity cost. If you niche yourself into one lane, that means you're not going to be booked motivational, networking, cardiac. So you have to give up something to get something. But I felt like that's where I belonged, in part because when I was preparing for the first TEDx, I realized even though one person dies by suicide every 9 minutes in the US, hardly anybody talks about it unless you bring it up. And then everybody's got a story. And I kept seeing that over and over. And clients would tell me, look, we just brought you in here to start the conversation on suicide. Because what that does is that gives people in the audience permission to give voice to their feelings and experiences around depression and suicide without recrimination. People have told me things after my shows they've never told anybody, not their family, not their therapist, nobody. It's like they're waiting for somebody to utter the magic words, depression and suicide. And then I'm working a ship, Holland, America. Breakfast, can't find a seat. There's a woman at a table for 2, empty chair. I point, she nods, I sit. She looks up, she goes, "Hey, are you the comedian?" I go, "Hey, did you enjoy the show?" She goes, "I love the show. I love the show." Well, then I'm the comedian. "What would you have said if I told you I hated it?" "They say I look a lot like it." She asked me if I did anything else. I said, "I'm a public speaker." I just nailed down a TED Talk. She said, "What's the topic?" I had this conversation by this point many times. I thought I knew what was coming. I said, "The topic is depression and suicide." Started to count down in my head. 3, 2, 1. She goes, "I tried to kill myself twice." What?
Yep. Right out there. Yep.
We just met.
Yeah. Brian and I have a similar phenomenon. When Brian talks about testicular cancer, it's boom. When I talk about sex addiction, someone's telling me about their problems in bed or their insecurities or their dick's too small. I mean, it's just that people are waiting to have this conversation because you say, and as you say it correctly, there are so few outlets, right? And one of the things that you do in your TED Talk, which is awesome, A Matter of Laugh or Death, I'm going to recommend that everybody watch it because I found it to be profoundly informative. I found it to be funny. It's a critical conversation starter. The way you start the talk, you give 3 numbers, 8 million, 1 million, 39,000. 8 million, 1 million, 39,000. What do each of those numbers represent?
8 million is the number of people in the U.S. who seriously consider suicide every year. 1.4 million attempt. And unfortunately, now the number is 47,000 people in 2019 died by suicide. They believe it's going to be probably twice that when you take in the months of the pandemic. They're called deaths of despair. And by the way, those numbers do not include opioid overdoses because you're never really sure whether they overdosed on purpose or overdosed accidentally.
And you had said at the time, right, that TEDx talk was what, 2014, you said?
Mm-hmm.
So 7 years ago when the numbers were 39,000, now you said it's up to 47,000, potentially double that with the pandemic. At that time, it was 2 times the rate of homicide in this country, right? So
yes,
2 times as many people were committing suicide than the homicides in this country.
That is correct. More than homicides, wars, and I can't remember what the third one was combined, though. 3 means of death combined, less than the number of people who died by suicide.
3 things of death that get a lot of airtime that we talk about very consistently. Yeah.
Again, they just bring me in to start the conversation. I did my first engagement, by the way, gentlemen, on the 3rd of March, my first live engagement. The Speakers Bureau called me and said, would you fly to Florida in the middle of a pandemic, Florida that has no statewide mask mandate?
Right.
Would you fly into a pandemic to speak? And I said, look, I'm suicidal. What do I care? So I got booked.
And that was 2 days ago. Okay. Just for all of you guys, like we're recording on March 5th here. And Frank, in your TEDx talk, you talk about how the darker the humor, the better for me, right? Like it's therapeutic. And I noticed you made a number of jokes during the TEDx talk that I found to be profoundly funny, that a lot of the audience, they're just uncomfortable with it because maybe they haven't been around conversations around depression. I happen to know quite a few people who have clinical depression, who have contemplated suicide many different times. As you say, it's always an option on the menu. And so I'm comfortable having these conversations. When I laugh at a joke like that, does that make you feel better? I mean, does it feel like make you feel seen or heard versus like someone who's sitting there going like, oh my God, I feel uncomfortable? Like, what would you want? How would you want us to react?
When I did my keynote the other day, I opened up talking about, comedian talking about suicide. How does that work? And I give him some reasons. I mentioned the court jester and his job or her job. And then I said, and I could tell you what the barrel of my gun tastes like. Spoiler alert. I told the joke. I have to tell them it's okay to laugh. Because I followed up with a friend of mine was in the audience and he had never heard me say I didn't pull the trigger out loud. So he came up afterwards and goes, hey, man, how come you didn't pull the trigger? I go, hey, man, could you try to sound a little less disappointed? Then they really laugh. So I have to put them at ease. It's okay to laugh. Well, you saw the TEDx. I'm up there going, I looked up suicide on the TED.com site. See how other people handle the topic. I figured it'd be, hundreds of speeches on suicide. There were 3. And then it hit me. Well, duh, if you're really good at suicide, you're not going to be recording a TED Talk. I know. It's just, and it got darker from there. My grandmother killed herself with a gas stove. My great aunt with an old Loctite refrigerator. What is it with my family and major appliances? I drive past Sears, I tear up.
I thought that was brilliant.
I'm on the edge. Do I laugh or do I not laugh? So I appreciate the permission. I mean, goodness.
Yeah.
That's the one I was thinking about, like during your talk where the whole audience was just like, ooh, you had told the story of your great aunt. That one's really scary. And maybe we'll work up to that one because I do think some of these stories are powerful because you're very powerful because you're talking about how this runs in your family. One of the things that I found to be most powerful of your talk was this helplessness in terms of being able to explain it to normies, normal people who don't understand what depression is. So who are normies, and what does it feel like trying to explain depression and what that's like to someone who just has never been there before?
I used to say normal people, but people busted me. All right, who's normal? Okay, neurotypical, neuronormal, just the average person who doesn't live with mental illness. And when I speak for the people in the audience who have mental illness. That's why the line is in there, but I can tell you what the barrel of my gun tastes like, because here's what happens. If you're watching the audience at that moment, when I say I can tell you what the barrel of my gun tastes like, if you knew who in the audience had mental illness, you would notice them all leaning in. And they're thinking, oh, he gets it. And then all the neurotypical people are leaning back like, oh, dear God. So anytime I do a keynote, it's part for the people with mental illness to reassure them they're not alone. And then part for the neurotypicals to try to explain what it's like to live with mental illness. And in my 4th TED Talk, Suicide, the Secret of My Success, Dead Man Talking.
These are solid titles here. These are all bumper stickers. You need more coffee mugs.
Yeah, because I realized that the title and subtitle, because they get a couple hundred applications per TEDx. Seattle gets 600. So whatever you put in that title subtitle box on the application, damn well better get their attention. I got a client I had dinner with in Florida. They lived down in Florida. She had breast cancer. And she said to me, cancer saved my life. Holy shit. That is counterintuitive. And it's going to grab whoever's watching it or reading it by the lapels and not let go until they figure out what that means. So titling is very important. Title, subtitle, elevator pitch. So I forgot the question.
How do you explain depression to someone who's a normie, right?
Yeah, well, I have a simile that I use, which is there was a Greek character named Sisyphus. And he gave fire to man, which is great because I love barbecue. But the gods were pissed. So they sentenced him to roll a rock up a hill every day. And the idea was he gets it over top of the hill, he can retire. But of course, every time he gets it near the top, it rolls back down to the bottom. I said, having mental illness is like that. It's like every morning you wake up, there's a rock on a hill. Some days the rock is small and the hill's not so steep. Some days the rock is a boulder and the hill is Kilimanjaro. But regardless, every day there's a rock and a hill. And I said to them at the end of that talk, I got a little choked up when I said it. I said, my job here today, and for anybody who hears the sound of my voice, is that when they wake up tomorrow morning, they can still move the rock. And I tossed it in, the whole story in, because I realized I had enough time to do it. It wasn't in the original, but I had no idea how powerful that simile would be. People quote it back to me all the time. Man, that thing about the rock and the hill. But it gives you an idea. Now, the upside of that, guys, I've been doing podcast after podcast after podcast, helping neurotypical people survive the pandemic. Because a lot of them are situationally depressed. They're depressed by the situation. They've never been depressed. So do they recognize what they have? Can they figure out why they can't get out of bed? So I teach them what mentally ill people learn early on. You have to have a self-care plan, have to have techniques, because I wake up in an uncertain world every day, whether there's a pandemic or not.
What is your self-care program and your techniques?
Hookers and blow. I always wanted to say that on podcast.
Yeah, it works for us too.
Yeah. 5 things. Diet. I'm on the keto diet and I do intermittent fasting. I eat about once every 24 hours. I'm a senior or master's bodybuilder. I've already done my first contest. I got another one coming up in July.
Wow. Nice.
Last time I got down to 8% body fat. This time I'm shooting for 4, which is the lowest healthy for men. Lowest. Yep. So diet. Exercise. I've got a old Nordic track and some perfect push-ups and some stretchy bands.
You have a Nordic track? Those things still exist? Come on,
yeah,
Frank.
And you wouldn't recognize it because there's no clothes hanging on it. But yeah, I mean, it's nothing but wood and rubber straps, and a tensioner. I mean, it is so old school, but it works. And then diet, exercise. Oh, good night's sleep.
Yeah.
Is restorative. Getting little sleep has become a badge of honor. I only slept 4 hours last night.
Stupid.
I'm happy for you. Yeah. I mean, it should be, I slept 8 hours. Yes, good job.
Yeah.
But I think you need to give into your circadian rhythms. I fought being a morning person for decades because I'm a comic.
Right.
Finally just gave in. I go to bed at 7, I get up at 2. That's my circadian rhythm.
Well, that's why you got to do corporate gigs, right? Those corporate gigs are done by 7 o'clock.
Yes. Or if they're not, it says in my writer, I want a pot of real coffee at my table. Otherwise, I'm face down in the mashed potatoes. Oh, meditation. Twice a day. I do a guided 29-minute meditation called the Catnapper. Has a binaural beat underneath it to sync the hemispheres of your brain, takes you down, brings you back up, and then medication. And when I'm talking to neurotypical people, I go, look, taking antidepressants ain't a life sentence. You're not going to have to take these the rest of your days. When the pandemic eases up and everybody gets vaccinated, life will return to near normal and you just taper off. And nowadays, when they give you a prescription for a psychotrope, a third of the people love whatever it is, and it works really well. A third of the people, it works okay. The other third sucks. The side effects are horrible. So that means 1 out of 3 people like the psychotropic, the medication they have. The other 2 don't. Now they have a cheek swab DNA test. They take your DNA and they match it to the psychotropic, like antidepressant, that will work best with your metabolism. So it cuts out a lot of the experimentation, lab rat, go on, taper off, go on, taper off. So those are the things. And then I have a technique called gamification. Do you guys know gamification?
Sure. Yeah.
My deal is, sometimes hard to get out of bed in the morning. So if I'm struggling to get out of bed, I make a list of 6 things, a to-do list. And the game is, when I scratch off number 6, I don't care if it's 3 in the afternoon, broad daylight. I can go back to bed, pull the covers over my head, and watch the rest of the series, Queen's Gambit or whatever.
Right.
That's gamification. It gets you moving forward. You do 6 things, you win, you go back to bed because that's where, you really want to be anyway.
I've never considered myself a normie before, but now I think I'm officially classified as a normie. And this is incredibly helpful. Like the idea of waking up and having a rock to push up some sort of hill, no matter how big the rock, every single day, like that sounds exhausting. So I can at least start to understand. But as you're talking about these self-care techniques, I'm thinking like, yes, like food or diet, working out, sleeping, like these are all really important things for me too. And when those start to slip in my life, when that foundation starts to crumble, like, yeah, I don't want to get up as much. Like I'm not as energetic. I'm not as directed. And so I think for even us normies, if that's what I am, this is really, really helpful to understand and something that we can all do together to a certain extent.
Yes, and because the world is out of control and everything, all routines and everything turned upside down. These are all things, diet, exercise, good night's sleep, you can control. You need a routine. They asked a guy who'd been in a space station for a year, pretty much by himself, except when they came up to bring groceries, how he survived that kind of social isolation. He said, one word, routine. I go to bed same time, I get up same time, I eat same time, exercise same time, every day, same routine, because everybody else's routine on Earth with the pandemic
got obliterated.
They're not going to work, they're not commuting, the kids are home. I mean, so you need to control the things which people with mental illness who are high functioning realize early on. You need to control the things you can control, just let the rest of it go.
Yeah. And one of the people I'd put in that category is my chief operating officer, Callie Simon. She's been on the show before. We have permission to share this about her. She was amazing during the hiring process where she revealed to me before, any decisions were made that I have depression and here's what it's like for me. And one of the things that she shared with me, because I'm a normie, and she developed this system to communicate her feelings with a boyfriend, a previous boyfriend who was an engineer, and she calls him like the Energizer Bunny of happiness. So like he's never understood what it meant to be like in the state. So she created this 10-point scale of here's where I'm at today. And the bottom line is like a 5 or below, and I can't feel anything. We could win the Super Bowl, whatever the most exciting thing in the world is. If she's a 5 or below, it does not register. And so she uses that with me. And when we are like doing our work and I ask her regularly, like, how you doing? And when she shows up and she's like, I'm a 5, I'm a 4. It's like, okay, great. So what would like be best for you right now? Do you want to disconnect from work? Do your self-care protocol? Because she does a lot of those similar things that you talk about, meditations, binaural beats, these to exercise. Other times, she just wants to do work to take her mind off of it. But like as someone who hasn't experienced that before, it's super helpful for me to know where she's at. And she said that she designed this system when she was in a healthy, good place. And it's like the best left brain system that she can use to describe like these right brain emotional feelings that she oftentimes has it's almost impossible for her to articulate, effectively. But for me, it's been really powerful.
Yeah, I try to bust myths when I'm doing my keynote. Major depressive disorder, which is what I have, one of my 2 things, is not situational. I've been most depressed and suicidal at the best times in my life. And I have been, on top of the world at some of the worst times. If I'm depressed, suicidal, won the lottery, great. Just, put the money in the bank and check with me in 3 days when my cycle ends. My cycle's 3 days. Go down 1 day, bottom out the second, come back up the third. With major depressive disorder, it can be 3 days to 3 weeks. The thing I've got going for me is I've had this cycle so long that I know when I begin to cycle down, that 72 hours later, I'll be cycling back up. So I've taken a keto approach. Keto is a martial art where you're not opposing directly your partner, your opponent. You blend with their energy. If they throw a punch, you step offline and you blend with their energy and you take their balance and you lower them to the ground. They used to say I battle depression, but that's not accurate because battle implies I can win. Yeah, I can lose and kill myself or have a tie like North and South Korea, kind of an uneasy truce. So I try to just blend with the energy of the depression because there's a great deal of energy there rather than push up against it and try to back it off. I blend with it and try to move forward with it. But again, normal people, I wish, and I've said this to my wife before, that the Vulcan mind meld was a thing. Because when I am, or the young lady who works with you is at a 4 or 3, if you could get inside our head, you'd come out screaming. How the fuck do you live with that? But I've been doing it so long. It's like my other issue is chronic suicidal ideation, which most people, even clinicians I've talked to, don't know about. It's not the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Illness. It means that for me and people like me, and I said this in my TEDx, suicide is always an option on the menu. Solution, problems large and small. When I say small, you know this. My car broke down. I had 3 thoughts: get it fixed, buy a new one, or I could just kill myself. That, and people in the audience, I said, look, it's okay to laugh. It does sound absurd, but know this. Every keynote I've given since 2014 has been at least one person in the audience, sometimes more, who have chronic suicidal ideation. They don't know it has a name. They think they're just some kind of freak. And all alone. I had a young woman come up to me after a college showcase. She said, thanks for your keynote. I said, you're welcome. She said, but I got to tell you, it made me weep. How did it make you weep? She goes, you know your story about the car, get it fixed, buy a new one, kill yourself? I go, yeah. She goes, I've been having those thoughts all my life. I didn't know it had a name. I just thought I was some kind of freak, all alone. And when I heard you say that out loud, I realized for the first time in my life that I am not alone, and I wept. So that's my why. That also gets me out of bed. And that's why I can't kill myself, by the way, because it's like being George Bailey and It's a Wonderful Life. I've been shown over and over and over what these people's lives might be like if I weren't there to simply say you're not alone. So if I kill myself, I would probably take many of those people with me because they never had a chance to hear somebody.
Wow.
That's such a clear why. That is such a clear why. And Frank, even if that is one or maybe more than one person in the audience, I can tell you even in just this conversation, how much value this is to somebody that even doesn't have the depressive disorders or whatever it may be, because I have those ups and downs. I don't know that it's a 72-hour cycle, but if I did know it was a 72-hour cycle or I wasn't feeling good, I would at least know there's an endpoint. This isn't my whole life. This isn't over. And so I think that, like, if I were to know that I had the techniques to self-care and to communicate in those moments, I know it's just a period of time. And Dominic and I have talked about often about like people trying to figure out what their purpose is and what their why is, and maybe just sitting in that and like letting that space marinate, as opposed to like, what do I have to do right now? But if you know that that's the cycle, great. Then like do the things, get through the cycle, know that you're in it.
Yeah. And by the way, let's say you figured out your cycle was 72 hours. A friend of mine who's lived with bipolar disorder for his entire life said, Frank, you probably don't think anything kicks that off or triggers it. Next time it happens, I want you to look back 24 hours. Look at the day before and see if there isn't a common element to that day before each time it happens. And sure enough, I found a couple of triggers. If I disappoint my wife or anybody whose opinion I care about, if I fall too far behind in my accounting and paperwork and whatever, it begins to pile up and I've got too much and too little time. So those are two of my triggers. He was right. I just thought he said to me, you're not a of your chemistry and wiring. Something is happening pre-depression.
That's amazing,
Huge.
Frank. Huge.
That's absolutely huge. And not to take us off subject here, but Dominic and I did a similar study with guys about what turns you on, like what makes you horny, what just happened. And we found out it wasn't just, for our heterosexual audience, it wasn't just a naked or good-looking woman, but it was weird shit. Like for me, if I had to write an email that I didn't want to write to investors or something, I would get horny. My body would distract the hell out of me. I didn't know that. I couldn't have said that. But when I looked for the triggers, I could find it and apply that to depression, apply that to a creative cycle. Like that's a beautiful technique and a huge amount of awareness.
And why I realized not too long ago that if I've got a task I need to do that I really don't want to do, all of a sudden I'm thinking I could jack off.
Yeah.
It's just like,
that's it.
You could escape. Here's the problem, guys, is I am so busy with the speaking business and such, I have to set an appointment with myself
to jack off.
to jack off.
So your trigger is an email, a notification alert. Like, oh, time to, what did you call it? Single-handedly, what is your title?
Treat your depression single-handed.
That's right.
Yeah.
Frank, one of the things you talk about again in your TEDx talk is, what are the things not to say to someone who is depressed and has had the courage to bring it up to you? So let's hit that. Like, what are the things not to say to someone who's revealed their depression to you?
Yeah. And, people genuinely care and they mean well when they say these things, but they just don't know what to say or what not to say. If somebody lets you know they're depressed, don't say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, turn that frown upside down. Have you tried fish oil? Oh, Christ.
Fish oil. Yeah, that's a panacea.
I can't tell you how many times That's right. No, I think killing you after that would make me feel a lot better.
Frank, is this mostly men giving you this advice or saying these things, or is it men and women?
No, men and women.
Yeah.
And they mean well. Either they don't say anything because they're afraid they're going to say the wrong thing, or they don't know what to say. Same thing with suicidal. If you let somebody know you're suicidal, oftentimes they won't say anything because they're worried at one or two things. They're going to say the wrong thing and kick it off, or they just don't know what to say. I mean, every now and then when I'm really tired, I like to answer the question, "How you doing?" honestly, just to freak normal people out. So I crawl into an Uber, nice young man. I'm in the back seat. Our eyes meet in the mirror, rearview mirror. I've just done 2 3-hour suicide prevention CEs back to back. I am exhausted. And he goes, "How you doing?" And I thought, okay, I'm going to tell him. I said, "I'm depressed and suicidal. How about you?" Long pause. He goes, "What am I supposed to say to that?" I said, "Do you really want to know?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "You're supposed to ask me, do I have a plan?" So he goes,
Right.
"Do you have a plan?" And then there's this long pause and he goes, "Does it involve Uber?" Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. So that's the thing. You need to surround yourself with people that you know, love, and trust. In our book, we talk about, it's all automobile metaphors. You need a pit crew. So when the wheels come off, they know what's going on. They know what to do. They say in the mental health business, should all over you. You should do this and you should do that. And so that's all part of the self-care, is having people around you. My workout partner said to me one day, "How you doing?" I said, "I'm wretchedly depressed." He goes, "What does it look like?" I said, "Well, remember when you're 18 and every other thought was about a woman?" He goes, "Yeah, what's your every other thought about?" "Going back to bed and binge watching Netflix." But I was able to say that to him. He didn't freak out. He didn't give me advice. He just said, "What does that look like? What does that feel like?"
One of our tenets that we talk about on this show often is, a great man creates space for others to thrive and ourselves.
Yeah.
And I struggle sometimes when speaking with someone that's depressed. Like, how do I create that space without giving advice? And so I often find myself saying nothing and just listening and maybe asking a question or two.
Ding,
But
ding, 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 ding.
yeah, so like, what do we do? Like, so there's the what not to do. So don't give advice, don't should. And you've given us a couple examples here, but I would love to hear anything else that I should be aware of so that I can help create that space and be part of the pit crew.
Well, number one, listening, because people say, my roommate's depressed. What do I say? Well, don't say anything. Just actively listen. When I do a keynote, I put my cell number on the PowerPoint slide. And I say to the people in the audience, look, if you're suicidal, call the lifeline. If you're just having a really shitty day, call a crazy person. Here's my cell number. Because I'm just going to listen and co-sign whatever bullshit they're wading through. I'm not going to tell them what they need to be doing. They don't have to explain anything to me. I'm not going to make them feel bad about it. So listening is where you begin. And then, like you said, ask leading questions. Ask questions you'd like to know. What does that feel like? What does that look like for you? Was there something that kicked this off for you in the last 24 hours? I mean, where are you coming from with this? Because my job, your job in that moment is not to save them or cure them. It's just to plant a seed of hope. Somebody cares. Somebody's asking good questions. And that's what you should say if somebody says, "I'm depressed." Okay, look, here's the deal. I'm here for you, and I mean it. I know you're not crazy, lazy, or self-absorbed. I understand that depression is a mental illness. Here's the good news. With time and treatment, things will get better. I will take the time. I'll help you get the treatment. And then you have to ask that question that even I have trouble asking. Are you having thoughts of suicide? And if you can't ask that question just like that, you find somebody who can. Because now there's an old wives' tale that you should never mention the S word, suicide, in front of somebody who's depressed. And I love the reasoning, especially as a comedian, because it might give them the idea. Suicide, what a great idea. Why didn't I think of that? Trust me, it's crossed their mind. So that's what you say if they are depressed. And then let's say they're not forthcoming about their suicidal thoughts, but you suspect, and always go with your gut, what kind of behavior should you be looking for? By the way, with depression, it's eat too much, can't eat, sleep too much, can't sleep, trouble getting out of bed in the morning, rallies in the afternoon. And the big one, you can notice this on Zoom, is letting their personal hygiene go. Their hair's a little dirtier than usual. Clothes don't look like they've had a wash because they're having trouble dragging themselves out of bed, take a shower, and run a little walk. So what would be the signs of symptoms of thoughts of suicide? They talk about death and dying. The death and dying appears as a theme in their artwork, their music, their writing. They're getting their affairs in order. in part giving away prized possessions because they want prized possessions to go to the people they want them to go to when they're gone. Collecting the means, obviously, stockpiling medications, buying a gun. 3 times as many women attempt than men, but men tend to complete because they use a gun. And 8 out of 10 people who die by suicide nowadays in the U.S. are men. That's why we wrote the series of books on men's mental health. The last one is, this is not an exhaustive list, just a list, is really dangerous. They've been depressed forever, and then all of a sudden, for no apparent reason, they're happy. Happy. And you're happy because, thank God, finally they're happy. The problem is they may be happy because they've chosen time, place, method, and they know that the pain is finite. The importance in that story is especially this. Suicide is not so much about killing yourself as it is ending the pain.
Damn, that last part about the euphoric feeling because like the choices have been made and the fight, like there's now like a knowing that this is going to end. You know, Frank, one thing that came up for me while you were talking about the getting the affairs in order, that triggered an experience from about 4 or 5 years ago where there was a friend in my life who I cared about, and she started talking openly to her close friends about it's over, right? Like I'm done here. I don't have anything else to live for. And she started putting up all of her furniture on sale on Craigslist, and she wasn't moving anywhere. And, you know, a number of her friends were trying to talk to her about it, and she just didn't want anything to, I mean, do you have a plan? Like, she didn't have the time and the place and the method picked out, but like she was preparing for it, and she didn't seem to want to be stopped. And we got scared. And so one of the things that we ended up doing, and I would love to know your like opinion on this, as like this was our best attempt, was this was in New York City. We ended up calling some service department, like a 911 that came in, intervened. They sent a mental health counselor to her home, and we all, like, to her apartment. I remember I was hiding in the stairwell waiting for her to get home, and I watched her like walk through the hallway so that we knew that she would be home for the 911 mental health counselors to come over. And then I called down. I said, okay, she's here. And then they came and they took her and brought her in the back of an ambulance. Actually, they came. She ran out of the apartment. She ran out into the street. This was the Festival of San Gennaro outside of her apartment, right? This was
my God.
The Italian, and Frank, I'm chasing her down the street. So like a man chasing a woman down the street, and she's like, get the fuck away from me. It's crazy. You know, now there's a crowd and it's crazy. And then eventually we had to wait for her to come back. And then they took her, brought her to the hospital overnight. And to this day, she has never forgiven us. But to this day, she's still alive. And I don't know how to necessarily remedy that. You know, how would you have handled that situation if you were us, her friends? Could we have done that better?
No, I don't think so. Because people always ask me, when do you call 911 or you know, similar? If you believe they're in immediate danger to themselves, if her talk, I mean, those are very dangerous things she was saying. And plus, she's selling her furniture. I mean, she's rolling up to a suicide. You guys did exactly the right thing. And I said the other day when I gave my keynote, you need to call the cops. And let me warn you, you call the police, she or he will be taken in front of a judge. They will decide whether there needs to be an involuntary detention order, and they'll get an all expenses paid 3-day vacation in a fabulous gated mental health facility with no shoestrings or belt. And they'll probably unfriend you on Facebook, but they're still alive. So yeah, it just takes somebody who's willing to sabotage the friendship to save a life. And it's difficult to do that. I mean, good on you guys for stepping out of your comfort zone. And that's the thing. It only takes one person to notice something and to step out of the comfort zone and take out. Anybody can stop a suicide. It's the world's most preventable cause of death. And you don't have to be a clinician to do so. If you're willing to step out of your comfort zone and confront them and be persistent. And like I said, you call the authorities. That's exactly what you should have done, because she was obviously rolling up. Now, here's the good news. Since we've been talking death and dying, 8 out of 10 people who are suicidal are ambivalent. They're not sure. And 9 out of 10 give hints in the last 7 days leading up to an attempt. So if you know now, if you're listening to this podcast, you know now what to look and listen for and how to behave. And we'll talk about in a second, what do you say to somebody who admits they're suicidal? You can step in and render the aid, like being a paramedic. If I have a heart attack and the paramedic comes, he's not going to do a valve job or give me 3 stents. He's going to take me to the professionals who can handle all that. So it's like mental health first aid. You're a mental health first responder. which, by the way, there's a great class, mentalhealthfirstaid.org. Mentalhealthfirstaid.org. It's an 8-hour class. It's soup to nuts, and they give you a binder, everything from depression all the way through non-lethal self-harm, through suicide. That way, if you have a friend who's struggling, you look and see at the list of symptoms and go, holy shit, this is serious. So I guess 8 out of 10 are ambivalent. 9 out of 10 are giving hints. Now, your friend may have been number 10 out of 10 or number 10 out of the 8 out of 10. I wasn't going to tell anybody. I wasn't going to give any hints. I was just going to, eat my gun. But the majority of people want somebody to step in and intervene. And if she was confiding in her friends, then she may have been reaching out for help and wasn't aware that's what she was doing. But let's say she admitted, I'm suicidal. What do you say? Well, you say, do you have a plan? And if you have a plan, what is your plan? And if it's detailed, then you need to do what you guys did, intervene. Now, this is not in any manual anywhere or psychology book. A friend of mine is a psychiatrist, also has major depressive disorder. We're chatting one day, and he goes, we need something beyond that. Let's say the plan is not particularly well formed. They got an idea, but, what do you say next? Well, you say simply, well, tell me, are you going to kill yourself? And if they say no, then you say, okay, then tell me why not. Now, you guys have already heard my why not. I can't kill myself because I take all those people with me. And I have another why not, and I think it's appropriate for this podcast. My mom and my dad were both gay.
Interesting. Yeah.
In the 40s in North Carolina, crazy about one another. Nobody came screaming out of a closet. Hell, nobody comes screaming out of a closet in North Carolina now. Yeah, because which bathroom do you use? Yeah. So I'm from North Carolina, and I'm not going back. Somebody asked me, why not? Mosquitoes, humidity, Republicans. Yeah. So both my folks were gay, and they tried to adopt, but there weren't any infants available in the 40s, late 40s, early 50s. So they decided to do it the old-fashioned way. They conceived, and my mother carried 2 to term that didn't make it. And somewhere found the courage to try a 3rd and a 4th time. My sister and I were born.
Wow.
So my feeling is she worked so hard to get me here. I have to work at least as hard to stay. So if you ask me my why, that would be part of my, and by the way, I was talking to somebody one day and we're talking about lesbians and children. Lesbians aren't qualified to birth and raise a child. You need to step the fuck back. Yeah, because my dad died at 40. All my mom's friends were gay. I have a keynote called Everything I Need to Know I Learned from a Lesbian.
Your keynotes are by far the best. And one of my favorite things about doing this podcast, besides, of course, working with Dominic here, is meeting people like you. And what I mean by that is in this podcast, you've opened my eyes to a whole new perspective and an understanding and given me language to talk about it. This topic of depression, I know I have some friends that are depressed. I'm terrified to have conversations with them sometimes because I don't know what to say. I truly don't. I'm just how you doing? That even seems risky at times. So, I really appreciate this. And you do it in such an approachable way. We can have fun with this. We can talk about it. And I hope, Dominic and Frank, I would love your thoughts on this, on what we should title this podcast. Because my fear is that if we title this thing Suicide, blah, 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 people won't listen to it. Right. I don't know that to be sure. But I would love to have a title from you on what can attract everybody, including normies, to this conversation. Because this has been so incredibly valuable, and I thank you for it.
Right, because you're a TEDx coach, right? I mean, you help people land their TEDx talk. So this could be a great, work in progress of how do we title this thing so that people click on it?
Yeah. And if you will give me, 24 hours, I don't know. My creative process is that you ask me that question because of my mentally ill brain. Once you ask me the question and I put myself to the task, it won't shut off. So you'll get text after text after text from me. How about this? How about this? How about this? How about this? The one TEDx, by the way, that I haven't written yet, I haven't pitched yet about my parents is gay in my DNA.
Ooh, that'll be hot.
Because if both parents were gay, and there's a reason that I love Tasteful Decorations, Judy Garland, and have an amazing ability to accessorize. I'm 1% gay, and the only thing I got to watch out for is never get 99% drunk. Because
Because then you'll have a great man within you. It just won't be yours.
Yes. Well, and on that note, if you got time for a quick story about my lovely wife, I met her in a tremendously gay neighborhood. She's very muscular. Turned out she's a bodybuilder, wearing tons of makeup, false eyelashes, gorgeous. And I gave her my business card for everybody to laugh, give me a call. She called. We set a date. Well, in Hillcrest in San Diego, largest gay population outside of San Francisco in California, all these lacage bars, boys will be girls. I'm thinking maybe she's got outdoor and not indoor plumbing.
No.
Yeah. So I told my roommate, look, here's her address. If I don't call you by midnight, send the cops because I'm playing a crying game and losing. She can take me. So at 11:45 in front of her, I said, can I borrow your phone? She goes, yeah. I said to my roommate, it's a girl.
Like a celebration.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I've said this more than once.
Got it.
On her phone in front of her. I've said this more than once. She's so smart and so funny and so wonderful that I would have married her if she had a penis because it's just plumbing.
Yeah.
If I'm the right person, like I said, I think I'm gay in my DNA. It's going to be a great TED Talk.
There was two selfish things I wanted to get out of this podcast, and one you did beautifully. I've never been yes and before by a comedian, and I feel like we nailed it. So we checked that box. Very exciting. Thank you for that. And the other thing is your name. Is Frank King your real name?
Yes. And if I could have changed it, I would have changed it in the beginning because 2 syllables and 1 syllable would have been smoother. Like Jay Leno. But I was going to change my name, but my mother, who's very funny, she's passed away, but she was very funny. I go, I'm thinking about changing my name, as a comedian. She goes, if I come to the comedy club and somebody else's name's on the marquee, I'm writing your narrow ass out of the will. So, but her name was Dixie, and I wish I'd taken Dixie King because it just sounds better. Yeah. 2 syllables, 1 syllable. Yeah, Dixie.
The reason I'm asking the question is I thought it was not your real name because the idea of franking, like I assume the definition is being very frank, which you are. It just sounds like a verb. I don't know. I love it.
Yeah. It is a verb. Actually, in Congress, you can send mail without postage, and that's called franking.
Huh. Look at you. Historian, too.
Bodybuilder, historian, comedian.
1% gay.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
You know what? How about a TED Talk called 1% Gay? I would listen to that.
Yeah. That's good writing. 1%. Yeah, that's got legs.
All right, Bryce. See me, man? Look at me now.
That was Frank just lit up. Yep.
Yeah, I love great titles. I've got a client who just got a TEDx in London at University of Essex, and it's about individuation. I don't know if you guys know what individuation is. Don't feel bad. I didn't either. Individuation is essentially midlife crisis. It can happen anytime, but what happens is you realize at some point you're living up to somebody else's expectations, make other people happy. And you go, screw this. I don't want to be a doctor, whatever. And then you make the change. And the subtitle is, what if who I am isn't really who I am?
Yeah.
I've met so many people after I started working with him on that are in that situation. I met a woman from the Philippines, firstborn female child, big expectations about the family. And she's gay. And that was not what they were expecting.
Yeah.
She sat her parents down. They thought she was going to tell them she's pregnant. Mom, Dad, I'm gay. She goes, I'm a Gaysian. I said, Gaysian? Oh, dear God. That's a great word. We should put that in the title somehow. So
this is genius stuff, man.
Well, Frank, where can people find you if they're looking to do a TEDx coaching or need a TEDx coach? Where's the best spot to find you?
I'm in witness protection now.
Okay.
So I'm your TEDx coach, TEDxcoach.com. If they go there, there's a free PDF, the 6 things you can do to kill your chances of getting a TED Talk. Everybody tells you what to do. But if I'm getting 200 applications, I got to read them all. I'm not looking through those applications for the first reason to book you or audition you. I'm looking for the first reason to throw you in the no pile and go to number 199. The other side I have is the mental health comedian, or as we say down south, the mental health comedian. And if you go there, the first book in our series of 4 books on men's mental health, I'm narrating them for Audible. And I had my audio editor create an MP3 for me that you can download for free. The entire audiobook unabridged. I'm narrating it from the mental health comedian because I figured I wanted a way to give it away in case people didn't have resources to get the book.
That's a beautiful service, Frank. And also for all the those people that you have reached, right, who felt seen and heard and understood, and not the only one whose trajectory could have ended up very differently without you speaking out publicly about this in such a approachable, lighthearted, heavy-hearted, like real way. That's a hell of a service. That's a hell of a legacy to be able to leave behind, knowing that there are other people's lives who have been saved by this work. And so just a big kudos to you, man, for that.
Oh, thanks.
Don't say leave behind in front of Frank.
That's right. That happens every now and then. Yeah, meeting planner. Well, and I do it all the time. Meeting planner said to me one day, "You're doing the keynote." I said, "Now she knows I put a gun in my mouth." She goes, "You're doing the keynote." I go, "Yeah, what do you want?" She said, "Just give me a couple of bullet points. I'll let that hang in the air." And she goes, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." I said, "Relax, Michelle. I just couldn't let that pass." Yeah, it's
amazing.
You're great, man. You're great.
When I did the event, I guess day before yesterday, I've never had this happen before. It was all men except one woman. I said, she's sitting right in the middle. It's like a construction association. Just one woman, all these guys that go, "Honey, you realize you're like swimming in a sea of testosterone?" A guy in the back, when I was doing Q&A, said to me, "Listen, I have a question. I got a comment." And I'm thinking, oh, Christ. He goes, "I just want to thank you for handling a difficult to talk about subject in such an artful way." I thought, well, thank you. I've never had that happen where I got a testimonial at the event in front of everybody. Yeah. And I mean, it was just, and I give my phone number out, and I'm sure I'll hear from somebody, because men tend not to ask questions out loud about that kind of thing. Oftentimes I get a text but I have had guys. I did that thing August of 19, did my little talk, went to the exhibit hall floor, where you meet the people that saw you talk. Guy walks up to me, he's a lineman. He strings wire on poles, and nobody can see his face, but I can. And there are tears streaming down his face. Big, grizzly guy. He lost his friend 14 years before, a friend of 14 years, to suicide. He goes, I had no idea. I would have done anything for him. I'd taken a bullet for him. I would have, why? Why did he want to die? And I said, well, there's a good chance he didn't want to die. He just simply wanted to end the pain. It's amazing what you can trigger with just the right, I guess Brene Brown, I read her book on vulnerability. You got to read Brene Brown. I'm like, how big could she be? Oh, dear God. She says, vulnerability is your superpower. I'm walking the dogs going, yeah, that's exactly right. And she says, and I've said this many times, because she lives with mental illness. She said, "I'm so comfortable in my darkness, I can sit comfortably with you in yours."
Yes.
Wow. Yeah.
Mic drop.
Yeah, that's a beautiful one. Frank, thank you so much for all the laughs, for the education. There's some deep stuff here that I'm going to be processing for quite some time now. I'm going to link all of your work in the show notes. If someone wants to hire you to speak, if someone wants to download one of your audiobooks, if someone wants to work with you as a coach, all of those will be linked. And then some of the other resources that you provided along the way, including your TEDx talk, which everybody needs to go and listen to immediately. There's some additional stories in there that are heartwarming and heartbreaking that we didn't get a chance to get to in this conversation. Please go watch it. It'll be a tremendous investment of your time. And once again, Frank, thanks for all of the work that you're doing here, man.
My pleasure. Make sure you put my phone number in there, because there may be somebody listening to us right now who has chronic suicidal ideation, and they just found out it has a fucking name.
Yes. What's that number, man?
858-405-5653.
It'll be there in the show notes. For today's call to action, I'm going to ask you to do something a little bit different and very specific. I'm going to ask you to share this episode with one person in your life that you know will benefit from having heard it. Doesn't necessarily need to be someone who's depressive or who has suicidal tendencies. It could just be someone that you know wants to be a part of this deeper conversation, that wants to be informed, that wants to know how to create safe spaces for people who may struggle with some of these heavier issues in their lives to feel safe, seen, heard, and supported. So find that one person, minimum of one person in your life that you're going to share this episode with. Let them know why you thought of them, and then send it along the way.